The 120 million did not freeze because someone shouted. It started smaller. A scanner stayed silent. Ad ops. 17 a.m. Asterline Airways Flight 407 was still boarding on time. The gate reader had already accepted Malcolm Reed's pass. One soft chime. One green box on the podium screen. One line added to the boarding log. Reed. Malcolm. 3A. Boarded. The gate agent handed his phone back. Seat 3A. She said. Malcolm nodded. He slid the phone into his coat pocket, picked up his black laptop bag, and walked into the jet bridge. He did not look like a man carrying trouble with him. Navy coat folded over one arm. Old leather passport case in his hand. A paper boarding pass tucked inside. Creased twice, because it had been printed at home and kept in a kitchen drawer overnight. On the inside flap of the passport case, a small photo showed a boy in a baseball uniform, missing one front tooth. At the aircraft door, the air turned cold. Dana Whitmore stood beside the forward galley with a crew tablet against her hip. Her name tag sat straight. Her scarf was tight. Her shoes were polished black. The man ahead of Malcolm stepped through first. Dana smiled before he reached her. Welcome back, Mr. Langford. Victor Langford gave her 2 fingers in greeting. Grey suit, silver hair, leather briefcase, a gold watch that caught the galley light when he turned. He moved into the cabin without showing a pass. Malcolm reached the threshold. Good morning, he said. Dana looked at his face first, then his coat, then the laptop bag, then the phone pocket. Not the barcode. First cabin is to your left, she said. Malcolm stepped inside. First class was quiet enough to hear the bin latches click. Glasses waited on white napkins. Blankets were folded into squares. A woman in 2C adjusted her magazine. Her husband in 2D held a paperback open with a grocery receipt for a bookmark. Malcolm stopped at 3A. The number above the window matched the paper pass. The paper pass matched the phone. The phone had already cleared at the gate. He placed the laptop bag under the ottoman. He laid the folded coat across his knees. He removed the paper pass and set it beside the armrest. Face up. Then he sat. The seatbelt clicked once. Dana came down the aisle less than a minute later. Her tablet was awake. For a moment, the screen faced row 3. 3A. Reed. Malcolm. Confirmed. A blue check sat beside the name. Her thumb hovered near the entry. She did not open the seat history. She did not scan the paper pass. She did not ask the gate to confirm the log. That was the first wrong step. If you were standing in the aisle then, the thing to watch was not anyone's expression. It was the tablet. The blue check beside 3A stayed lit. The scanner in Dana's hand never made a sound. Dana turned the tablet inward. Sir, she said, are you certain this is your seat? Malcolm picked up the paper pass and held it level. 3A. Dana glanced at it. Less than a second. Behind her, Victor Langford had returned to the aisle. His briefcase rested against one knee. He held a folded boarding document close to his chest. No one asked him to unfold it. I believe that's my seat, Victor said. Dana turned toward him. Her voice lowered. But not for privacy. Mr. Langford, I'm sorry about this. Near the forward curtain, a man in a charcoal suit stood half inside the galley shadow. Silver hair. Company badge clipped low. His phone was dark in his hand. Dana looked at him. He gave one small nod. No policy was read. No manifest was opened. No error message appeared. Dana turned back to Malcolm. Sir, we need this seat for another passenger. The cabin changed in pieces. The magazine in 2C lowered. The paperback in 2D stopped moving. A glass touched wood without a clink. A phone screen lit in row 4 and stayed low against someone's thigh. Malcolm looked at Dana's tablet. Then at the silent scanner. Then at Victor's folded paper. My pass was scanned at the gate. Dana did not answer that. There has been a seating adjustment. Malcolm placed the paper pass back on the armrest. He smoothed the crease with one finger. The boy in the baseball photo stayed visible inside the open passport case. Is there a problem with my ticket? Dana held the tablet closer to her body. No red notice flashed. No duplicate seat alert sounded. No one checked Victor Langford's pass. Only Malcolm Reed, already boarded and seated in 3A, was being asked to prove what the system had already accepted, and the quiet question stayed there. If the process worked at the gate, why did it stop only when he sat down? Malcolm waited for the correction. It was still available. Dana could have scanned the paper pass. She could have tapped the blue check on the tablet. She could have called the gate and asked for the boarding log from 2 minutes earlier. The aircraft was still at the gate. The door was still open. The aisle was still passable. Nothing had hardened yet. Malcolm held his hands in plain view, one resting on the armrest, the other near the paper pass. He did not lean back. He did not stand. He let the documents remain where everyone could see them. Victor Langford stayed in the aisle behind Dana. His briefcase touched the side of his leg. His folded boarding document stayed closed. He looked toward the window seat, not toward Malcolm's face. "I have a connection after landing," Victor said. Dana nodded once. "Yes, Mr. Langford. We'll take care of it." The words landed cleanly. "We take care. It." Malcolm looked at Dana. "My seat is confirmed." Dana's lips pressed together for a moment. Then she lifted the tablet slightly. Not enough for him to see. "We're showing a seating adjustment." "Then, please show me the adjustment." She did not turn the tablet. Across the aisle, Ruth Palmer lowered her magazine completely. It rested open on her lap. Her husband, Howard, kept his paperback in both hands, but his eyes were no longer on the page. Ruth looked at the tablet. She had seen the blue check too. Howard saw her looking. He followed her eyes. The tablet was angled away now, but the earlier image had already passed through the row. 3A. Read. Malcolm. Confirmed. Howard's thumb stayed inside the paperback. The grocery receipt bookmark bent under the pressure. He did not speak. Dana took one step closer to Malcolm's seat. The movement was small, but it closed the space between the aisle and the window. "Sir, I need your cooperation." Malcolm picked up the paper boarding pass. The paper had softened at the fold. The ink was sharp. The number 3A sat in the center of the page. "I am cooperating," he said. "I'm asking you to follow the same process you used at the gate." Dana looked at the pass. Again. Less than a second. Then she turned her head toward Victor. "Mr. Langford, if you'll give us a moment." Victor gave a short breath through his nose. "I'd prefer not to stand in the aisle all morning." A passenger in row 4 lifted his phone from his thigh. He did not raise it high. He angled it between the seats. The screen reflected a small rectangle of cabin light. Dana saw it. Her shoulders became straighter. "Sir," she said to Malcolm, "we can provide another seat and a travel credit. I did not ask for credit. It would be a more comfortable solution." "For whom?" Dana stopped. The cabin did not move. A bin latch clicked in the rear. Someone coughed once. The boarding music continued at the same soft volume, too calm for the space it filled. Near the forward curtain, the man in the charcoal suit stepped out from the galley shadow. He did not come all the way to row 3. He did not need to. His badge caught the light when he turned. Graham Voss. Operations. Dana looked at him again. This time the nod was slower. Malcolm saw it. Ruth saw it. Howard saw it. The young man in row 4 kept the phone steady. Dana turned back. "Mr. Reed, if you refuse the reassignment, we may have to treat this as a refusal to follow crew instructions." Malcolm's hand stayed on the paper pass. "Which instruction?" Dana did not answer. "Is my ticket invalid?" "No." The word came too quickly. Ruth Palmer's fingers tightened on the edge of her magazine. Malcolm continued. "Is there a duplicate scan?" Dana looked down at the tablet. "No." "Is there a safety issue with seat 3A?" Dana's jaw moved once. "That is not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" Victor shifted behind her. "For God's sake," he said. "Just move him." No one corrected the sentence. Not Dana. Not Graham Voss. Not the passengers who heard it. Howard Palmer looked down at his book. The printed page had not changed. His thumb had creased the receipt nearly in half. Ruth leaned slightly toward him. "He hasn't done anything," she whispered. Howard nodded. Still, he did not speak. Dana held the tablet against her chest now. The seat map was gone from view. Sir, this is your final opportunity to resolve this voluntarily. Malcolm set the paper pass back on the armrest. He aligned it with the seam. The way a person squares a document before signing it. I will remain in my assigned seat, he said. If you remove me, please state the reason clearly. Dana looked toward Graham Voss. Graham's phone was still dark in his hand. He did not speak. He only lifted his chin once. Dana reached for the crew phone near the galley. The scanner still had not made a sound. Dana spoke into the crew phone with her back half turned. Gate. We need assistance in first class. She paused. Her eyes moved to Malcolm. Passenger refusing crew instruction. She did not say seat dispute. She did not say confirmed ticket. She did not say the scanner had not been used. The words entered the system in a different shape. Malcolm heard the change. So did Ruth Palmer. She looked at Howard. Howard still held the paperback, but the book had closed around his thumb. The receipt bookmark stuck out at an angle now, bent and soft at the corner. In row 4, the young man kept his phone low. The red recording dot reflected faintly on his thumbnail. Victor Langford stepped back from the aisle and adjusted his cuff. Finally, he said. No one answered. 2 minutes passed before security arrived. The first officer was in a dark blazer with an airport badge clipped to his chest. His name tag read Nolan Graves. The second was younger, broader, with a radio at his shoulder. Tyler Wren. Officer Graves stopped beside row 3. Sir, I'm told you're refusing to comply with crew instructions. Malcolm picked up the paper pass and held it out. I'm refusing to leave a seat assigned to me. Graves took the pass. He read it. His eyes paused on the center line. Seat 3A. Then he looked at the number above the window. Then at Malcolm. His face changed by less than an inch. Enough. Dana stepped closer. He has been offered an alternate seat and compensation. We need to maintain boarding. Graves still held the pass. Was there a duplicate assignment? Dana looked at her tablet. No, not exactly. Malcolm turned toward her. Not exactly is not a record. The young officer, Wren, glanced at the tablet. Then at Dana's scanner. The scanner was clipped to her belt now. Its small light stayed steady. No recent scan tone had sounded. Graham Voss moved from the forward curtain. He entered the aisle slowly, like the aisle belonged to his title. Officer, he said. This is an airline operations matter. Graves turned. And you are? Graham Voss, Vice President of Operations, Asterline Airways. Dana's shoulders lowered a fraction when he said it. Victor Langford looked more settled. Malcolm did not move. Graham stopped beside Dana. Not beside Malcolm. We have a premium passenger accommodation that requires adjustment, he said. Mr. Reed has declined a reasonable solution. Graves looked down at the boarding pass again. This pass says 3A. It does. Graham said. The answer was too smooth. Ruth Palmer's magazine slid from her lap to the edge of her seat. She caught it before it fell. Howard looked at her. She whispered. He said it does. This time Howard did not look away. Malcolm folded his hands once, then separated them. Officer Graves. Am I being removed because my ticket is invalid? Graves did not answer immediately. Dana looked at Graham. Graham looked at Graves. Victor Seaherd. Malcolm waited. No. Graves said. The word was quiet. Am I being removed because I threatened anyone? No one said that. Graves replied. Did I block the aisle? No. Did I refuse to show my boarding pass? Graves looked at the paper in his hand. No. The cabin held those 4 answers. No invalid ticket. No threat. No blocked aisle. No refusal to show proof. Only a requested seat. Graham's mouth tightened. Mr. Reed, he said. The crew is authorized to determine whether a passenger is interfering with operations. Malcolm turned to him. By sitting in a confirmed seat, Graham did not answer the question. He used a different sentence. You are delaying departure. The word delaying moved through the cabin. It was heavier than adjustment. Easier to write down. Easier to defend later. Malcolm looked toward the open aircraft door. Then write the delay reason correctly. Dana's fingers moved on the tablet. What would you like it to say? Graham asked. Malcolm picked up his passport case from the side table. The small baseball photo was still visible inside the flap. Passenger seated in 3A with confirmed boarding pass. Crew requested removal for another passenger. Boarding pass not rescanned in cabin. Dana stopped typing. Graves looked at her. Wren looked at the scanner again. The first real silence came then. Not the quiet of first class. The quiet of people noticing the same missing step. Graham broke it. Officer, we need him off the aircraft. Graves kept the boarding pass in his hand for 1 beat longer than necessary. Then he handed it back to Malcolm. Sir, he said. Lower now. They can ask you to step off, so this can be resolved at the gate. Malcolm took the pass. Under protest. Graves nodded once. Malcolm unbuckled the seatbelt. The click sounded clean in the cabin. He stood. He picked up the laptop bag, folded the coat over his arm, and placed the paper pass on top of the passport case, so the seat number stayed visible. Before he stepped into the aisle, Ruth Palmer spoke. He never raised his voice. Everyone turned. Ruth sat straight. Magazine closed on her lap. Howard looked at her. Then at Malcolm. Then at the officers. My wife is right, he said. The pass was valid. Dana's eyes dropped to the tablet. Graham looked toward the forward door. Malcolm stepped into the aisle. The scanner still had not made a sound. The jet bridge narrowed the sound behind Malcolm. The cabin stayed open at his back. The gate area widened ahead of him. The paper pass stayed on top of his passport case. Officer Nolan Graves walked on his left. Officer Tyler Wren walked 2 steps behind. No one touched Malcolm's arm. No one needed to. The shape of the escort was enough. At the end of the jet bridge, passengers waiting for another flight looked up. A woman stopped stirring her coffee. A child lowered a plastic airplane from his mouth. A man near the charging station raised his phone, then held it still. Malcolm stopped beside the gate counter. Behind the desk, the supervisor looked down at her tablet before she looked at him. Her name tag read Marla Kent. Mr. Reed, she said. We can place you on the next available departure. Malcolm set the passport case on the counter. The paper pass remained visible. 3A. I'm not asking for another flight. Marla's thumb moved across the tablet. We can also provide travel credit for the inconvenience. Inconvenience is when a bag arrives late. Marla stopped typing. Officer Graves looked toward the aircraft door. Dana stood just inside it now. Tablet against her chest. Graham Voss stood behind her with his phone still dark in his hand. Victor Langford was no longer in the aisle. Through the gate window, Malcolm could see him settle into 3A. The grey suit leaned back. The briefcase went beside the wall. Dana bent slightly and placed a glass on the side table. Malcolm watched the glass touch the napkin. Then he looked back at Marla. I need the official reason I was removed. Marla's mouth tightened. The crew reported refusal to comply. With what instruction? She looked at Officer Graves. Graves did not answer for her. Malcolm took out his phone and opened a voice memo. He placed it on the counter beside the boarding pass. The red line began moving. Please state your name. Title. And the official reason Asterline Airways removed me from paid seat 3A. Marla looked at the phone. I'm not comfortable being recorded. You don't have to speak, Malcolm said. The silence will also be part of the record. The gate printer clicked behind her. One white strip came out and curled under the plastic lip. No one picked it up. From the aircraft doorway, Dana's tablet chimed. She looked down. Graham's phone lit a second later. He read the message. His face did not change at first. Then his jaw set. Malcolm's phone vibrated. He answered. Elena. The voice on the other end was controlled, but not soft. Tell me you're safe. I'm at the gate. You're not on the aircraft. No. A pause. What did they do? Malcolm looked through the glass at Victor Langford in 3A. They removed me from my confirmed seat to give it to Victor Langford. Elena Shaw did not answer right away. Paper moved on her end. A keyboard clicked twice. Graham Voss is on that flight manifest, she said. Yes. Do they know who you are? Malcolm looked at Marla. Then at Dana. Then at Graham, who was still reading his phone. No. Elena's breathing changed. The first transfer cleared this morning. 25 million. I know. The remaining 95 is scheduled after the 2 o'clock board session. Malcolm placed one finger on the boarding pass and held it flat against the counter. Freeze the budget, he said. The entire 120 million. Do it now. Marla looked up. Officer Wren looked at Graves. Elena did not ask twice. Reason. Material conduct concern. Leadership exposure. Passenger handling risk. Civil liability review. Sending. The line stayed open. Inside the aircraft, Graham's phone vibrated again. This time he stepped fully out of the doorway and looked toward the gate. Dana followed his eyes. Marla's radio cracked. Gate 12. Hold. Flight 407. Executive Operations is requesting status on removed passenger. Marla reached for the radio, then stopped. Malcolm looked at it. Removed passenger, he said. No one corrected the phrase. Elena spoke again through the phone. Legal has been notified. Caleb is preparing preservation notice. We need names. Malcolm looked at Officer Graves. Officer Nolan Graves. Airport security. Graves nodded once. Slowly. Malcolm looked at Wren. Officer Tyler Wren. Wren lowered his eyes, then lifted them again. Supervisor Marla Kent. Malcolm continued. Flight Attendant Dana Whitmore. Operations Executive Graham Voss. Passenger Victor Langford. Marla swallowed. This may be a misunderstanding. Malcolm looked at the boarding pass. The misunderstanding was available before security arrived. The gate area went quieter. Not completely. Airports never went completely quiet. Wheels still rolled. Announcements still echoed. Coffee still steamed behind the kiosk. But around Gate 12, people had stopped pretending not to hear. Through the glass, Victor Langford lifted the drink from 3A. Graham Voss stared at Malcolm from the doorway. Dana held the tablet with both hands now. Malcolm ended the call and left the phone on the counter. Voice memo, still recording. The paper pass had not moved. The seat number remained in the center. 3A. Graham Voss read the notice twice. The first time. His face stayed arranged. The second time. The color left the skin around his mouth. Dana Whitmore stood beside the aircraft door with the crew tablet pressed against her ribs. She could not read the full message from where she stood, but she saw the header. Ridgewater Capital. Funding. Hold notice. Graham's thumb stopped on the screen. Inside the cabin, Victor Langford sat in 3A. The glass Dana had placed beside him rested on a white napkin. He had not taken a sip yet. His briefcase stood upright near the side wall, where Malcolm's laptop bag had been a few minutes earlier. Victor looked toward the doorway. Are we leaving or not? Graham did not answer. His phone rang. The screen showed a name. Arthur Bell. Graham stepped back into the galley and answered. Arthur. The voice on the other end was not loud enough for the cabin to hear. Dana could hear parts of it because she stood near the curtain. Why am I receiving a funding hold from Ridgewater Capital? Graham turned his back to first class. We had a passenger situation. A pause. Dana watched his shoulders. Then Arthur Bell said a name. Malcolm Reed. Dana's eyes moved to the gate. Malcolm stood at the counter beyond the glass. His paper boarding pass still lay flat beside his phone. Officer Graves stood near him. Not blocking him. Just present. Marla Kent had stopped typing. Graham lowered his voice. We are still confirming details. Arthur Bell's reply came through sharper. No. I am looking at the investment file. Malcolm Reed. Managing partner. Ridgewater Capital. Scheduled board meeting at 2. Seat 3A on flight 407. Removed from that seat 20 minutes before a $120 million funding review. Dana's hand shifted on the tablet. The tablet screen woke under her palm. The seat map was still open. 3A. Reed. Malcolm. Confirmed. She closed it. Too late. Across the aisle. Ruth Palmer saw the motion. Howard Palmer saw Ruth see it. He placed his paper back on his lap and left it there. Open and unread. In row 4. The young man kept recording. His phone was still low, angled between the seats. His face had gone still in a way that made him look older. Graham ended the call after 2 short sentences. Then he looked at Dana. Get him back on. Dana did not move. What? Now? She looked toward 3A. Victor Langford had heard enough to understand the shape of the problem. He stood halfway, one hand still on the armrest. What is this? Graham stepped into the cabin. Mr. Langford, we need you to return to your assigned seat. Victor stared at him. This is my seat now. No, Graham said. It is not. The words reached the gate through the open aircraft door. Broken by distance, but clear enough. Malcolm did not look up immediately. He was still watching Marla Kent's radio. It cracked again. Gate 12. Executive instruction. Do not release Mr. Reed from the area until corporate response connects. Officer Graves turned his head toward the radio, then toward Marla. Mr. Reed is not detained. Marla's thumb froze on the side button. Of course, she said. Malcolm looked at the radio. Then, use a different word. No one spoke. Marla lowered the device. At this point, look only at the objects. The boarding pass still says 3A. The tablet had shown confirmed. The radio said, do not release before anyone wrote the reason correctly. The question is no longer who has the seat. The question is why the record keeps changing around the same piece of paper. Dana stepped off the aircraft. Her shoes made small sounds on the jet bridge floor. When she reached the gate, she stopped several feet from Malcolm. Not close enough to crowd him. Mr. Reed, she said, we can restore your seat. Malcolm picked up the paper pass. He did not fold it. Can you restore the log? Dana looked down. Can you restore the report you already gave security? She did not answer. Can you restore the moment everyone in that cabin saw me walked out for sitting where the system placed me? Dana's eyes lifted, then dropped again. Behind her, Graham stood at the aircraft door. His phone was in his hand. The screen kept lighting. Victor Langford was now in the aisle, his briefcase hanging low, his mouth pulled tight. A flight attendant behind him pointed toward another row. He did not move until Graham said his name again. Victor. That did it. Victor picked up his glass and set it back down without drinking. The napkin stuck briefly to the bottom, then fell flat. Ruth Palmer watched him leave 3A. She turned to Howard. You should say it, she said. Howard's hand moved to the bent grocery receipt in his book. He pulled it free and held it between 2 fingers, as if the paper needed straightening. Then he stood. His knees took a moment, but his voice carried. That man had the pass. Howard said. We all saw it. The cabin became still, not silent. Still. Dana heard him from the gate. So did Malcolm. He looked through the glass at the empty seat. 3A was clear again. The system had corrected the chair, not the record. By early afternoon, the boardroom at Asterline headquarters no longer looked ready for a funding meeting. The coffee had gone cold. The printed agenda stayed untouched. Asterline's quarterly forecast sat in neat folders at every seat, but no one opened them. On the wall screen was a paused image from the cabin. Malcolm Reed in the aisle, Dana Whitmore in front of him, Graham Voss behind her. Seat 3, visible over Malcolm's shoulder. Arthur Bell stood at the end of the table. He had taken off his glasses and set them beside a stack of legal notices. Vivian Cross sat to his right with a policy binder open. Caleb Munro, Ridgewater's counsel, had a laptop in front of him. Elena Shaw appeared on the conference screen, still and watchful. Dana sat 2 seats away from Graham. Her hands were folded tightly on the table. Graham sat back as if the chair still belonged to him. His company phone lay face down near his hand. A security officer had already collected his laptop from the side table. Arthur looked at the technician near the screen. Show the seat record. The cabin image disappeared. A system page replaced it. The exact seconds were not important anymore. The order was: gate scan accepted. Passenger boarded. Seat 3A confirmed. No duplicate assignment. No invalid ticket flag. Cabin tablet viewed the seat. Security called after that. Then came the line that changed the shape of the incident. Reason entered. Passenger refusing crew instruction. No one spoke for a moment. Malcolm looked at the screen, not at Graham. That is where the record stopped describing the ticket and started describing me. Arthur's face did not move. Dana looked down at her hands. Caleb turned one page in his folder. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "when you approached Mr. Reed, did the system show his seat as confirmed?" Dana swallowed. "Yes." "Did you scan his boarding pass in the cabin?" "No." "Did the tablet show a duplicate assignment?" "No." "Did Mr. Reed threaten anyone?" Dana's eyes lifted briefly toward Malcolm. "No." Graham leaned forward. "She was managing a boarding delay." Vivian Cross looked at him. There was no delay until the seat was challenged. Graham's mouth closed. Caleb continued. "Ms. Whitmore, who told you to move Mr. Reed from 3A? The room tightened around the question. Dana looked at Graham first. That was the human part of the reveal. Not the words yet. The glance. Graham sat straighter. "You should not answer that without counsel." Arthur turned to Dana. "You may request counsel." Dana's fingers separated on the table. She rubbed one thumb across the other, then stopped. She looked at the screen, then at Malcolm. Mr. Voss said Mr. Langford needed the seat. Graham exhaled through his nose. "That is not an instruction." Dana's voice became smaller, but clearer. "He said to resolve it before departure." Caleb waited. Dana continued. "He said if Mr. Reed pushed back, find a reason." The sentence stayed in the room longer than the cabin video had. Elena Shaw leaned closer to her camera. "Was that the phrase?" Dana nodded. "Yes." Graham stood halfway from his chair. "That is being taken out of context." The technician clicked once. A passenger video appeared. Low angle. Shaking frame. A seat back in the foreground. Dana's shoulder at the edge. Graham's voice came through with cabin noise under it. "Find a reason. Victor needs that seat." The clip ended. The screen went black. No one rushed to fill the silence. Arthur sat down slowly. Vivian closed the policy binder, then opened it again to a marked tab. "Executive override access can be suspended pending investigation," she said. Graham turned toward her. "You are letting Ridgewater dictate operations." Arthur placed one hand on the printed log. "No. The record is dictating operations." That was the space reveal. The boardroom changed. Not loudly. Not with apology. The company devices were collected. The access card was requested. The investigation file was opened. The cabin video was preserved. Graham looked around the table for the old room. It was not there. Caleb slid a document forward. Ridgewater's conditions remain the same. Independent review. Employee protection. Full preservation of logs and messages. 5-year audit of premium cabin removals. Written correction to the passenger record. Dana looked up at the word protection. Malcolm saw it. "What you did was wrong," he said. Dana nodded once. "But the correction cannot stop with the person holding the tablet." No one answered. On the wall, the seat record returned. 3A. Confirmed. No duplicate assignment. The room was no longer arguing about a chair. It was looking at the process that had tried to move a man after the system had already cleared him. Graham Voss did not leave the boardroom as a defeated man. He left as an employee under review. That was the difference Asterline wanted in writing. No raised voices. No hands on his arms. No speech in the lobby. A corporate security officer stood beside the door and read from a printed checklist. Graham placed his access card on the table. Then his company phone. Then the thin metal key for the operations suite. Each item made a small sound against the wood. Vivian Cross signed the receipt. Arthur Bell did not look away. "Your operational authority is suspended pending investigation," he said. Graham looked at Malcolm. "You think this fixes anything?" Malcolm did not answer at first. The screen behind them still showed the record. 3A. Confirmed. No duplicate assignment. "No," Malcolm said. "It only stops the next instruction from coming from the same place." Graham's jaw moved once. Then he walked out. The door closed softly. No one clapped. Dana Whitmore remained seated with both hands around a paper cup of water. The cup had bent slightly under her fingers. She noticed it and loosened her grip. Caleb Monroe slid another document across the table. "Employee witness protection," he said. "Written, not verbal." Arthur signed it. Dana watched the pen move. Her name was not cleared. Her actions were not excused. But the chain above her was now part of the file. Malcolm stood. "Ms. Whitmore." Dana looked up. "You will need to tell the investigator exactly what happened." She nodded. "I will. Not what sounds safest." Dana's eyes dropped. Then she nodded again. Arthur turned to the communications director near the wall. "Replace the public statement." The woman held a tablet against her chest. "With what wording?" Malcolm did not sit back down. "Say a passenger with a valid first-class ticket was wrongly removed from his assigned seat," he said. "Say the company is preserving records. Say an independent review has begun. Say executive authority has been suspended pending investigation. Say employees who come forward will be protected." The communications director typed. Arthur watched the words appear. "That will hurt us." Malcolm picked up his passport case from the table. The small photo inside the flap had shifted slightly. The boy in the baseball uniform was crooked now. Malcolm straightened it with his thumb. "It should." No one answered that. Outside the boardroom, the headquarters floor had gone quiet. Assistants moved carefully. Phones vibrated instead of ringing. A few people looked through the glass and then looked away. The correction spread through the building without drama. Asterline's internal system locked Graham's override access. Flight 407's cabin report was reopened. The earlier reason line was preserved. Not deleted. A second line was added beneath it. Passenger held confirmed seat 3A. Removal reason under review. Graham's name stayed on the access report. His directives from the last 5 years were added to the audit scope. Not announced. Not celebrated. Added. Victor Langford's corporate accommodation note was removed from the priority file. Future seat requests under his profile required written review from 2 departments. No automatic override. No informal cabin adjustment. No seat taken because a familiar name wanted it. Dana's tablet was collected. The gate radio log was copied. Officer Graves sent his incident note with 1 sentence added near the bottom. Boarding pass appeared valid at time of removal. By evening, the first 3 archived complaints were reopened. The same wording appeared in all of them. Passenger refused crew instruction. No duplicate seat record attached. No invalid ticket flag attached. No cabin rescan attached. The 120 million stayed frozen. Not cancelled. Not restored. Frozen. Ridgewater Capital required the audit first. Names. Dates. Records. Prior complaints. Corrected files. Written changes. Board. Signatures. Arthur Bell signed the hold acknowledgement before sunset. His hand paused only once. Then he finished the signature. It was late afternoon when Malcolm returned to the airport. He did not board Flight 407. He did not ask for Victor Langford's apology. He did not take the voucher Marla Kent placed on the counter. Marla printed a receipt instead. Not for miles. Not for compensation. For the corrected record. She handed it to Malcolm with both hands. The paper was warm from the printer. At the center of the page, under passenger status, 1 word had changed. Cleared. Malcolm did not smile when he read it. The word was not a gift. It was a correction. He folded the receipt once and placed it inside his passport case. Behind the photo, at gate 12, the scanner chimed for the next passenger. The light turned green. This time, the agent looked at the screen before speaking. The system had not become just. It had only been forced to tell the truth. This story is fictional. All characters, events, and settings are invented and do not represent real people or real situations. It is created for educational and storytelling purposes only, to explore behavior, choices, and consequences in a clear and thoughtful way. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental.